Did you know that an ancient Jewish tradition claims Moses' staff, the very rod that parted the Red Sea, can be traced all the way back to the Garden of Eden? Yes, some obscure commentaries suggest it passed through the hands of the patriarchs, carrying a legacy of divine authority from Adam onward. Most people never hear about this mind-blowing detail, but it sets the stage for understanding why Moses was no ordinary leader. Here was a man who didn't just rise from humble origins. He bore a staff linked to humanity's earliest story. If you're intrigued by such rare insights into the Holy Scriptures, don't forget to subscribe right now so you never miss these hidden gems. Today, we'll break down the secrets of Moses' extraordinary leadership that reshaped history, and by the end, you'll see why his approach remains timeless for anyone seeking to guide others to freedom and purpose. Think of leadership and picture the usual suspects: imposing figures born into power or charismatic personalities eager to command. Yet Moses emerged from unexpected circumstances. As an infant, he floated in a basket among the reeds of the Nile, spared from death by his mother's desperate ingenuity and the compassion of Pharaoh's daughter. He grew up in the royal court, witnessing firsthand the authority of Egypt and the suffering of his own Hebrew people. Later, a single impulsive act, killing an Egyptian, forced him into exile. There he became a shepherd, an identity far removed from any glamorous notion of leadership. But perhaps that's the point. Moses was shaped in solitude and hardship. The best leaders are not always polished in palaces. Sometimes they are forged in quiet fields, learning patience, humility, and resilience. Stay with me, because we'll soon see how these qualities allowed Moses to stand firm before a tyrant and guide a nation out of bondage. The pivotal moment came before a burning bush that was not consumed by its flames. Here, on sacred ground, Moses encountered a divine calling that would define his life. He tried to resist, arguing that he was not eloquent, that he lacked the credibility to confront Pharaoh. Yet it was precisely this reluctance that made him authentic. He did not seek leadership for personal glory. He accepted it reluctantly, with fear and trembling, and only because he trusted in a higher mission. This is a leadership lesson too often forgotten. True authority often emerges from a calling, not ambition. By grounding himself in divine purpose, Moses tapped into a wellspring of strength. He would act not for his own ego, but for the liberation of an entire people. Keep watching, because the way Moses balanced courage and humility is about to get even more fascinating. Moses was not a man who dictated from a distance. He was a leader who listened. He listened to God's voice, even when it challenged him. He listened to his people, even as they grumbled and complained in the wilderness. When they wept from hunger, thirst, and fear, Moses' ears were open. He truly heard their cries, their frustrations, their needs. Such empathetic listening is rare and powerful. Many leaders today neglect this skill, preferring to issue commands rather than pause and understand. Moses, however, took the time to absorb the struggles of those he served. This established a bond of trust, a crucial ingredient for guiding a nation through unimaginable hardship. Don't go anywhere, because the next lesson about learning to delegate is one that modern leaders still need to master. At one point, Moses found himself overwhelmed by the constant demands of his people. He tried to settle every dispute, handle every complaint, and manage every detail himself. Sound familiar? Many leaders burn out this way. But then his father-in-law, Jethro, offered wise counsel. Choose capable, honest men to oversee smaller groups and let them handle the routine issues, saving the most difficult cases for Moses. By heeding this advice, Moses transformed chaos into order. This ancient lesson, now known as the Jethro Principle, teaches that great leaders multiply their effectiveness by empowering others. Trusting subordinates not only lightens the load, but also fosters community responsibility. Delegation wasn't about losing control. It was about gaining strength through shared stewardship. Stick around, because we're about to see how Moses balanced unwavering conviction with astounding humility, a combination that rarely graces the corridors of power. The scriptures call Moses the most humble man on earth. Think about that. The greatest prophet, who spoke with God directly, never allowed power to inflate his ego. When the Israelites sinned, dancing around a golden calf, Moses interceded on their behalf, even offering himself as a sacrifice if it would mean their forgiveness. True humility doesn't mean weakness. In Moses' case, humility was strength under control, compassion over vengeance, mercy woven into leadership. He saw himself not as a demigod ruling over lesser beings, but as a servant entrusted with souls he cherished. Such profound humility is a rarity, and it gave him moral authority that no amount of coercion could replicate. Stay tuned, because we're about to explore how Moses blended justice and compassion into a moral framework that endures to this day. Moses returned from Mount Sinai, carrying stone tablets etched with divine commandments, laws that would influence Western civilization's moral compass for millennia. Yet Moses wasn't just a lawgiver, he was a mediator who balanced justice and compassion. He enforced standards strictly, but also pleaded for mercy when his people strayed. Too often, leaders drift toward extremes, harsh authoritarianism, or permissive leniency. Moses charted a middle course, upholding principles yet acknowledging human frailty. This blend allowed the Israelites to grow ethically and spiritually. They learned that the law wasn't meant to crush, but to guide them toward a higher ideal. If you're intrigued, keep watching, because the resilience Moses showed in the face of endless adversity is another hallmark of his extraordinary leadership. Leading thousands of people through a barren wilderness for 40 years is the ultimate stress test. Scarce resources, hostile threats, internal rebellions, Moses confronted them all. He adapted to ever-changing conditions, trusting that divine provision would meet their material and spiritual needs. When water was scarce, he sought miraculous springs. When enemies loomed, he directed strategic responses. When the people lost heart, he reminded them of their calling. Adaptability is often cited as a modern leadership virtue, yet here it is in ancient form, guiding a homeless nation step by painful step toward their destiny. Don't leave yet, because we're going to revisit that Edenic staff and what its legendary origins might mean for understanding leadership as part of a grand, divine narrative. Recall the claim, Moses' staff may have originated in Eden's garden, passed down through righteous generations until it reached his hand. Whether one embraces this tradition as fact or symbol, it carries a profound message. Moses' leadership was no accident. It was part of a legacy of faith stretching back to the dawn of humanity. He inherited not just a tool, but a heritage, a divine storyline that he would carry forward. Leaders rarely emerge in isolation. They build upon the lessons, values, and sacrifices of those who came before. Moses' rod was more than a prop for miracles. It represented continuity with ancient wisdom, reminding him that he was part of something vastly larger than himself. Stay with me, because the next crucial piece of Moses' leadership puzzle involves setting the stage for a new generation of leaders. Truly great leaders know when their time is ending. Moses led Israel to the brink of the promised land, but would not enter it himself. Rather than clinging to power, he prepared Joshua to succeed him. By investing authority in another, Moses ensured that the mission, freedom, faith, covenant, would not die with him. In a world where leaders often grasp positions until the bitter end, Moses' willingness to pass the baton stands out. His purpose was never self-glorification. It was the well-being of the community and the fulfillment of their destiny. Such foresight and generosity of spirit remain rare. Keep watching, because we're about to assemble all these lessons into a blueprint you can use in your own leadership journey, no matter how large or small your sphere of influence. Let's stitch together the qualities we've observed: humility, empathy, the courage to accept a daunting calling, the wisdom to delegate, the moral strength to enforce justice tempered by compassion, and the faith-fueled resilience to press on despite endless hardships. Combine these with a respect for heritage, a commitment to future generations, and you have a formula for leadership that transcends time and culture. Moses didn't rely solely on natural charisma. He anchored himself in divine guidance and community well-being. He created a moral ecosystem, not just a social order. Keep watching, because we're going to see how even Moses' weaknesses contributed to his greatness. We forget that Moses was once terrified to speak in public, so much so that God allowed Aaron to help him. Yet that very limitation drove Moses to depend more deeply on divine assistance and communal support. By acknowledging his weaknesses, he actually expanded his capacity. In a world that often celebrates confident showmanship, Moses shows us that vulnerability can forge stronger bonds. When leaders admit they need help, followers respond with trust and collaboration. The story of Moses transforms the notion of a flawless hero into a more human and relatable figure. Keep watching, because we're about to see how Moses kept his people front and center in every decision he made. Moses never lost sight of why he led. It was for the people's sake, not his own. He interceded for them when they rebelled, wept for them when they suffered, celebrated their victories, and mourned their losses. He didn't treat them as stepping stones to personal achievement, but as souls worthy of dignity and freedom. This people-centered leadership made the difference between ruling a crowd and guiding a community. It's a timeless lesson. When leaders place their people's well-being above personal ambition, the result is healthier, more stable, and more harmonious societies. Stay tuned, because the impact of Moses' legacy echoes long after his voice fell silent. Moses never built monuments to himself. Instead, he shaped a legacy of moral clarity and faith that would reverberate through generations. He didn't need grand statues. His influence was carved into the conscience of a nation. Over centuries, religious traditions, ethical frameworks, and even modern legal systems have drawn inspiration from his leadership model. This enduring resonance suggests that true greatness lies not in flashy displays of power, but in leaving a moral blueprint that helps others navigate their own wilderness. Keep watching, because our final chapters will connect all these insights into principles you can adopt. Whether you lead a family, a team, a congregation, or just yourself, consider how Moses' example might guide you. Are you facing a daunting task, unsure if you're qualified? Moses stood in your shoes. Are you overwhelmed by responsibilities? Moses learned to delegate. Do you struggle with balancing firm principles and kindness? Moses embodied that tension. Are you wrestling with uncertainty and crises? Moses persisted, relying on faith and adaptability. Do you fear that your limitations disqualify you? Moses' stutter didn't stop God's plan. And if you ever wonder how to ensure your efforts outlive you, remember how Moses nurtured Joshua, ensuring continuity beyond his mortal life. Moses shows that extraordinary leadership isn't locked in ancient times. It's a living template we can still follow. Don't go yet, because one final reflection ties this all back to that mysterious staff and the grand narrative we share. That ancient staff, rumored to originate in Eden, symbolizes leadership as part of a grand storyline. Moses didn't arise randomly. He stepped into a narrative woven through generations, culminating in his extraordinary role. We too inherit stories and traditions that shape our responsibilities. When we lead with humility, empathy, courage, wisdom, and a sense of divine calling, we tap into something greater than ourselves. By serving others, we become links in a chain stretching back through the ages, connecting past wisdom to future hope. Moses reminds us that leadership is not about personal glory. It's about guiding people toward their promised horizons.